You know, after a week's vacation, I kind of got a little out of the loop, and I don't know if you're into the loop, but this is too important. Too many interesting things are to be understood and grabbed here by you about, you know, what is happening in the world, what is happening in the universe, and so forth. On Sunday, the last time I was here, April 5th, we made a connection between Supernova 1987A, which is that, and you're aware of what Supernova 1987A is, and that is the one that was taken by Hubble. We made a connection between Supernova 1987A and 4555. That was important, okay? 2 days after that connection was made, something very strange occurred to me that I will share with you today. And that's why I need you to come up and see it with your own eyes. Some that were here on the Tuesday night saw this, but the rest of you, I need to show you this. Because you know, there are coincidences in life, and I understand them. I make space for coincidences, and I realize that you have to do that. But there are some times when things are so strong that they overwhelm the possibility of a coincidence. This is something you'll have to decide on. But if you remember that 4555 was one of the three symbols that Jesus gave the Coptics of Egypt 2,000 years ago, and we found that number to be very strange in our searching, and then with the help of Debbie Sibilia, we found that it was a galaxy in the constellation Coma, which is the mother and child, and we even have a picture of 4555. And then, after we made the connection with Supernova, and I'll share this with you in just a minute, but after we made the connection with Supernova 1987A, and if you don't understand why it's called 1987A, this star, which emitted this tremendous Magellanic cloud type of gas back 166,000 years ago, grew and just expanded, and in 1987A it blew. In 1987 it exploded. And now the debris is rushing towards the core of that thing. But after we made the connection in April 5th between Supernova 1987A and 4555, we used ancient scripture in the book of Daniel. And we used Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which, you know, you've heard that story, and they have a song on it and all that kind of business. They were thrown into a fiery furnace, and that's in the Bible. And the furnace presents a center to our study because obviously the story is a myth. You cannot throw three people into a fiery furnace and then look in and see them, you know, reading Playboy or cooking marshmallows, whatever, you know, they were doing. It's just silly. It's absolutely silly. So logically, that could not happen. So we then said, well, what in the world did that mean? If our logic said that no human being can exist inside of a fiery furnace, what was a furnace a sign of? You know, what was that? There's an N missing. Well, what we had to do, we had to look on the very first page of the Bible. And in Genesis 1, verse 14, it says, "Let there be lights in the heavens, and let them be for signs." So what we did, we looked up into the sky, and we found a constellation in the sky called Fornax. And the word Fornax means furnace. So then we saw, okay, is the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the fiery furnace a reference somehow, since it's a symbol, to a sign, and since we're told in the Bible to look into the sky for the sign, is all of this a reference to Fornax, which is the furnace in the sky? That would seem to be the logical way that we had to proceed. Okay, so we looked. Do you have the stuff with you? If you have it with you, we looked on page 37 And on page 37 of the material, and for those of you at home, we saw the word furnace at the top, and there is the word furnace. And then, if you look at what it says at the bottom, the Middle English from the Latin fornax. So we definitely said fornax and furnace are the same. Fornax means furnace. But then what was interesting, we came down to the Indo-European root, and at the bottom we see fornax, furnace, and then fornix from the Latin arch, a vaulted brick oven. So not only then did we connect the furnace to fornax, which is the constellation, but we also connected it to fornix, which is an organ in your brain. So we have connected the furnace of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to a constellation, fornax, and in addition to that, we connected it to an organ in your brain called fornix. So we've got now the scriptures, we've got the sky, and we've got our heads. Now, on page 38, and you feel free to explain, if you hear, that's fine. She's talking, but she's explaining in Spanish what we're talking about. No, please continue to do that. Continue to do that. Now, I'm just telling people while you're talking. Please continue to do that. Don't. And I appreciate that you're doing that. I wish I like to be able in the United Nations, then they have earphones. But you go ahead, and you just go ahead and be comfortable doing that. And everybody understands. That's fine. I appreciate it. Oh, what? Okay, on page 38. Now, don't you stop. Now you're going to stop, and then I'm going to get... Okay. Okay, on page 38, we see the constellation fornax in the center. And at the bottom it says the bright star is Delta Fornax. Okay, and that's fine. So we've got a Delta Fornax in the sky, and that's good. Then on page 33 of the stuff that we look at, we see that the word delta, and we see Delta Fornicus, which is, as you can see in the very last paragraph, the Delta Fornix, because it's shaped like delta. So we have connected a Delta Fornax in the sky and a Delta Fornix in the brain. So we establish there a point that if there is a furnace in the Bible, which there is, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which is a sign, then we'd have to look, as the Bible says, in the sky for signs. We look in the sky for signs, and we find a fornax, which is a furnace, and then we find a delta fornax in the sky, and then to connect that to ourselves, we find a fornix, which is the same as fornax, and we find a delta fornix. So we've connected all of these. And it's a very prudent way, I think, to do this. That's all I'm ever asked anybody to do when they look at me and they don't understand what I'm talking about. All I've asked anybody to ever do is just be logical. Use logic, And I think the most important thing a person can do in their life is no longer be a Christian, no longer be a Muslim, no longer be a Buddhist, no longer be a Hindu, no longer be a New Age, no longer be a fundamentalist. Be a human being. And just be open so that you can interact with God and the universe without any preconditioned or preconceived ideas that come from religious groups. Then you're free. Then you're part of all this. But as long as a group, whatever that group is, has you to follow their ways, you're done. Because, look, there are things that the Muslims know that the Christians cannot accept because the information comes from Muslims. There are things that the Christians know that Muslims and Hindus can't accept because the information comes from Christians. When you're free of all that, you can pick and choose everything, be part of everything. Anything that's logical, anything that's real, anything that's reasonable. But you've got to be free from all of that connection in order to do it. And it's such a wonderful thing. Then you can be one with the universal God. If you're not, then you're either with the Christian God or the Jewish God or the Muslim God. Well, that's silly. That's silly. So we've established something prudently here, connecting supernova with 4555. Then we've connected the furnace of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with a constellation and an organ in the human brain. Now, in Daniel 3:19, and I'm not going to chase you back to these pages. It's on page 726. If you want to go look at it again, that's fine. But if you don't, because I'm doing a review, in Daniel 3:19, the furnace for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was heated 7 times hotter. That's very important. That's very important because that 7 times would equate with the 7 chakras of the Hindus. Now, in your work that you may take what I say and explain to other people, chakras may be very foreign to a lot of people. And a Christian particularly would say, I don't want to hear about chakras. I don't believe in that kind of stuff. Okay, then you open the Bible to Revelation 5, verse 1, and you read about the 7 seals. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. There is no difference whatsoever between the 7 chakras of the Hindus and the 7 seals of the Christians. It's the same stuff. So what happens then is when they heat the furnace 7 times for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what is being reasonable, I think, to consider there is that the solar fire is moving up the spine through the 7 seals or the 7 chakras, where it will impact at the pineal gland of the brain and then move along a straight line to the fornix and set the oven on fire, set the brick vaulted furnace on fire. And that's the way that's the way it works in the body. The solar energy or the fire goes up the 7 chakras or 7 seals to the pineal, and then there's a straight line from the pineal to the fornix, and then the fire, and then that causes the amen inside of the fornix to come out. All right? From the pineal gland, you got all of this if you're interested, because I'm going to take this off. All right. From the pineal gland of the brain, there goes a straight line. And this is important because now what we're saying here is supernova 1987 A is the pineal gland of the universe. Okay, so then let's look at the pineal. The pineal gland of the brain has a straight line that goes from it to the fornix of the brain, which, as we know, is the furnace. Now, the pineal is the place of the fire. So that would sound reasonable. The fire going from the pineal to the furnace. Okay? So that's what we're talking about. All right. Now, if you have your material, and if you look at page 10, on page 10 of the material, you'll see a picture of the brain. And there in the bottom of the second paragraph, you'll see the word stria pinealis. S-T-R-I-A, pinealis, P-I-N-E-A-L-I-S. And that means a straight line from the pineal. Stria pinealis, and then it says, which runs along the junction of the, well, we'll go through that, of the medial upper surfaces to join the front anterior pillars of the fornix. So isn't that interesting? There is a straight line from the pineal gland to the fornix in your brain, and it's called stria pinealis. Given the fact that the pineal gland is the source of fire and the fornix is the source of the furnace or the oven, isn't it interesting that the pineal then would be almost like a, one of those things, a fuse that travels that fire and then causes the furnace to explode in fire. The interesting thing, and the reason for that, is because you remember in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the 3 were in and then they became 4, which we'll talk to you about in a minute. Okay, so there's a straight line that runs from the pineal gland to the fornix of the brain, which is in your head. Now, the assumption being that when the solar energy rises through the 7 chakras or seals, it hits the pineal, The fire moves along the straight line to the fornix and lights what? The furnace or the oven. All right. I am convinced in my mind that the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is a story about the fornix of the brain and receiving the fire from the pineal gland of the brain. The three in the furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to me represent three parts of you and me, which is the physical, intellectual, and emotional. Okay? They represent those three parts. The story in David says, they will not bow to the king. What does that mean? Same as you. The only reason that you're sitting here is because you no longer want to submit yourself to the system. You've tried the system's ways all of your life. You've tried the system's religion all of your life, and you couldn't find any logic, and you couldn't find any benefit, and so you decide, no, I don't want any more of that. In other words, you will no longer bow to the system. When you no longer bow to the system, you are then thrown into yourself. Who else is there? Yeah. There's no religion. There's no institutions that can teach you because you can't listen to them anymore because it's violence and so forth. So you now turn into yourself, and when you get into meditation, you activate the pineal and you light the furnace. And when you light the furnace, the three parts of you, which is your physical body, your intellectual being, and your emotional being, are cast into the furnace, and you are joined by the fourth person who, for lack of a better word, we will call the Spirit, which is God, which is Jesus, which is Christ, whatever. Okay? And the only reason that you're joined in that way, you're not joined because you heard a song at church. That doesn't do it. You're not joined because you got emotionally turned on at a revival meeting. That does not do it. You're not joined because you fell down under the power of somebody else's influence. That doesn't do it. You're joined because you were driven through the fire of the pineal to the fornix of the brain, and there the fourth person appeared in the same way as it did with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The physical, intellectual, and emotional nature of you was joined by the fourth, who is the Christ, who is the Krishna, who is God. All right? So, now we have what we call the Spirit coming alive to join the other three. So that's the biblical story. And the activity that it complements in your body. Three people in the furnace, and the fourth appears in the story of the furnace heated up 7 times, which we've covered. Now, if this is in the Bible, it fulfills the need for a document. Okay, so we have the Shadrach story, and the document is taken care of. That's fine, because you had to have some kind of a document. So we say, okay, we've got this story. All right, but there's a third activity that also has to be filled, and because we understand as far as the document, we understand as far as the mind, but now we have to fulfill this astronomically in the sky. Okay, it must also be fulfilled in the sky if what goes on in the sky is a duplicate of the human mind and is in a position to duplicate what's written in the Bible. Okay, how many constellations are there that are in the... Do you know what the ecliptic is? The ecliptic is a circle sort of like this, okay? And the Earth is in the center, and there are constellations that the sun passes through in this ecliptic. And these constellations are in this ecliptic, so to speak. How many constellations are in the ecliptic? You know? Okay. There's 12. How many signs of the zodiac are there? There's 12. Okay. So there's 12 signs. There's 12 constellations. Make up the zodiac as you know it, okay? How many cranial nerves do you have in your head? You have 12. What I'm doing here, I'm trying to show you a connection, and that's when you leave today. I'm going to give you something to think about that's very, very interesting, and I'm not pushing anything on you, but I just want you to give some serious thought to it. 12 signs, 12 constellations, 12 cranial nerves in your head. And your head, you know, you have 10% on the left side which is the intellectual side, and 90% on the right side, which is this emotional, spiritual, whatever side. Okay? Now, Dr. Gary Toller of NASA at Goddard Space Laboratories tells us that the universe is 10% seen and 90% hidden. I find that very interesting, given the fact that our brain is the same way. You know, are we living inside of the brain of God, if you want to call it like that? I mean, is the universe another body that we live inside of? Because there's a lot of living things inside of your body. And so then we as living things inside of this great body. Okay. If that's the case, then if the universe is a gigantic brain, could supernova 1987 be indeed the pineal gland of that brain? All right. Now, let's think about that. But then back to the story. If the furnace changed the 3 to the 4 in the story in the Bible, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were joined by the 4th. If Kundalini in the body rises up to the pineal and then to the fornix and causes us to come in contact with what we call the spiritual. Now we have physical. So in other words, 3 to 4 in the Bible, 3 to 4 in our head. What happens in the sky? What happens in the sky? So we have to go up to fornax then, don't we? Because we know that, you know, we're joined by the spiritual and we go inside of ourselves. We know that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were joined by the 4. If you go to stuff 97, at 97, you see the location of supernova 1987A. 97. Do you have that? Because I want you to see that. If anybody here doesn't have that or can't see it, you know, I know we've reviewed it for them, but let me just show you. Where I have the circle is a constellation, all right? That's called the Large Magellanic Cloud. The Large Magellanic Cloud is the constellation where supernova 1987A is located. The eye in the sky is located where that circle is. All right? Now, I've drawn a straight line from supernova 1987A's location in the Large Magellanic Cloud to the fornax or to the furnace. In other words, I've drawn a line, we'll call it supernova 1987A, as the pineal, and we've drawn a line from that to the fornax or the furnace in the same way that the body draws a line, a stria pinealis, from the pineal to the fornix. So we've done the same thing. Now, the straight line, as you see, crosses some other things that are interesting, aren't they? Well, you say, I don't know. First, supernova 1987A in the Large Magellanic Cloud, which you see with the circle, is in the constellation Dorado. Dorado means fish. And I would like to equate some of that with the Jesus story about Jesus being the sign of the fish and all this kind of business. But, you know, whatever. The idea of the second coming, though, of the fish could really be considered if this turns out to be the way we think it is. Right. The energy moves first on the star map on page 97 through Hydrus. Now, what's interesting about Hydrus is, if you look on your star map, in order for the pineal or supernova 1987 energy to get to fornax, it's got to move through Hydrus, which is the 9-headed serpent. And what I find interesting about that is the discovery of the 9 planets, which you all have a document in your stuff about. There was 9 planets discovered. The last one being by this group who discovered constellation Corona. There was 9 planets discovered before they revealed the picture from Hubble. So could that be the 9 from Hydrus? It's interesting. Why not? It could be. The second thing that for the large Magellanic Cloud. The second thing that the line goes through is reticulum. The word reticulum means net. What's interesting to me about reticulum meaning net is that in the human brain, pia mater, the most sensitive part of the brain, which equates to the holy of holies, is separated by dura mater, the outer portion of the brain, by something called arachnoid, which is the web. So we have the web and the net. Now we find that supernova 1987A, if some energy is going to get to fornix, it's got to go through the 9, which is already done, the discovery of the 9 planets. Then it's got to go through the net in the same way that you've got to go through the web, and you know, that's fine too, okay? The next constellation to be crossed is Hieroglium, which is the clock. Now, of course, that's interesting, because we're looking at the pineal. That's interesting for several reasons. Number one, is there a statement being made in the universe that the time has arrived? I believe that that is definitely true. But now, here we think of supernova 1987A, the pineal moving to fornax, right? Okay. What I want you to look at, oh, I forgot to put this in. Doggone it. But anyhow, I was going to give you something, and I forgot to. I just didn't have time yesterday to do that. The pineal gland of the brain is called by doctors and scientists the body's clock. Where's it going through? It's going through the net, the web, arachnoid. Now it's going through the clock, which is the pineal gland of the brain. The pineal gland of the brain is the body's time clock. Okay? Now, I have something, and I'll give it to you next week, that will document that for you. All right? The pineal gland of the brain is actually defined in most medical journals and scientific journals as a biological clock. So I thought that was interesting. Okay? So the connection of the straight line from supernova to fornax to the clock is really the right path. Finally, we cross Eridanus. You see Eridanus? Which is the river. It is an extremely long river. And what I looked for when I saw that was in the Bible, in Psalm chapter 46, verse 4. It's on page 486 if you want to look at it. If you don't, that's fine too. I'd read it for you. In Psalm chapter 46, in verse 4, it says, "There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacle of the Most High." Okay? And I don't believe any river that flows on the planet Earth fits that description. But I believe the river in the sky, which is Eridanus, definitely does. What does it have to do? It has to come through the 9, which it already has done. It has to come through arachnoid, the web, the net that you must. It has to come through the clock because it is the biological clock. And now it must cross the river as you must cross the river. Okay? Now we're looking to connect 45. Now this is interesting. Now let me. I think it was. I'm not sure whether it was Don or whether it was Mike the last time I was here, who said, "Look, if you connect down the other way through the left, you go through Hydrus, and then you go through Tucana to Phoenix. See that? Draw a line, imaginary line down from the Large Magellanic Cloud, and go down the left way, and you come down to a constellation Tucana, and then you go to Phoenix. What's interesting about Phoenix is the firebird that rises out of its own ashes. But Tucana, I'm having problems with. The only thing so far I've been able to get about Tucana out of the encyclopedias is the word astron, which means space. And I've also been able to find a word that's joined to a toucan, Toucain, which means bird. Now, whether Tucana as a bird and Phoenix as a firebird together are placed there for whatever reason. But I will work on that, and we'll see what connection could be made there. Because I think the fact that Phoenix is there and it is the firebird that rises from the ashes is more than merely coincidental. Okay? So I think what we have here then is the movement through the brain that we've found. We have the movement in the Bible that we found. But we now have found this movement on the star map, which is very substantial. We know the 9 planets were discovered. We can compare the net with the arachnoid or the web. We know the pineal is a biological clock, and we're saying 1987A is a clock, and we know that crossing over the river is the basis of all religious thought of getting to the other side and so forth and so on, and reaching the promised land. So, you know, I think it's worthy of our attention. But we have to connect 45-55 because that was part of the Coptic key. And the reason we're looking to do this is because 45-55 is a constellation, Coma, which is mother and child, in the zodiacal sign of Virgo, the virgin. And the Bible says, behold, the virgin shall conceive. What the religionists miss when they talk about the virgin in physical terms is that the Bible is very specific on its first page. Let the stars be for signs. And then in Isaiah it says, the Lord will give you a sign. Well, the Bible has already told you, don't look for people. Look for the stars to give you the sign. So we look in the constellation Virgo. I'm sorry about that. We look in the zodiacal sign Virgo. We look in the constellation Coma, which is mother and child, and lo and behold, what do we find lurking there? 45-55. That's where 45-55 is located. So what have we done? We have fulfilled the Coptic key in which Jesus gave 3 signs, which included the number 45-55. We fulfilled the prophecy which says the Lord will give a sign, a virgin shall conceive. Isn't it strange? It could be any place else in the universe, but it's there at the sign of the virgin. Okay? It is. So now we go back to the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the fiery furnace. And in chapter 5, we see in our Bibles that you have in your hand something that's, the paragraph is headed by these words, the handwriting on the wall. The handwriting on the wall. Okay. As the people are gathered, now right after the furnace incident, excuse me, right after the furnace incident, you see this story which the people are gathered at this feast, and a man's hand with no arms floats into the room, writes on the wall, and it writes these words. And I'm not going to put this on the thing, because I did last time, I don't want to take that. But it writes, Mene, tekel upasha. Tekel means weighed in the balance, and uparshan means separate. But anyhow, right after the furnace incident, this thing is in the Bible. Mene. What was interesting, we found that in Greek and in Hebrew, each letter has a numerical value. And when you look at the numerical value of the Hebrew letters, the letter M has a value of 40. The letter E has a value of 5. The letter N has a value of 50. The letter E has a value of 5. The number that is shouted and repeated twice in the book of Daniel is 45-55. Right? So to me, that is very, very interesting. Because it's right after the fire. Right after the furnace. And we have this number, 45-55. And I've showed this to you, and I could put the, there's no need for me. Do you want to see the actual letters? Is there a need for me to put that on the overhead?
Yes.
Okay. Then I will do that. And there's a dime under there. Told you when the last time. That's all right. Okay. Let's see. Well, I think you can see this. All right. There is the letter M. All right. which is 40. You see that? And there's the Jewish letter. In E, I don't know. Yeah, it's got to come down a little bit. Just put it, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so we got the letter M, Hebrew, which is 40. In E, that's the Hebrew letter, and there's the number value 5. All right? There is N. There's the Hebrew letter, and the value of 50. Now, don't look at that when you're moving it, because you can't. You have to look at that when you move it.
Which one do you want to go to?
Yeah, but just look at that. Don't look at the wall. That's what I'm trying to say to you, because when you move it on the wall, everything goes backwards. That's fine. Okay. So once again, 40 is M, 5 is E, 50 is N, 5 is E. So those are. Just bring this over to this way, Ethel. That's fine. That's great. Thank you. You can see the Hebrew letters. In this particular context, it was in Hebrew. But you can see the Hebrew letters there, which are this one, this one, this one, and this one. And that adds up to 45, 55. Okay, Al. Thank you, Ethel. All right. Now, this is the interesting part here. I want to share something with you. On April 5th, we concluded the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And the determination was to connect 45, 55. We were able to do that, and I think, within reason, we were able to do that. 2 days after April the 5th, which was a Sunday, on Tuesday, I was in Burlington, New Jersey, inspecting a system for the company that I work for. And one of the jobs that I had this year was to coordinate all of the registering of the Comcast cable company antenna structures, their tower sites. And I had to make sure that all the registrations got into Washington by the 15th of April. So I had a fellow working with me. I don't know his full name. His name is Dick, and he's an engineer. And I was in Burlington. I was doing something else, and he came over, and he said, "Geez, I'm glad you're here." He said, "I brought this because I heard you were going to be here, and I wanted you to see this." And he says, "I want you to look this over." And I said, "Okay." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Well, you were the manager for the Comcast cable system in Brick, New Jersey, for 22 years. I said, "That's right." And he says, "Well, they have a tower that's over 200 feet that has to be registered." I said, "I'm aware of that." He said, "Well, I just wanted you to look over the registration, the Federal Aviation Administration registration, to make sure that you were comfortable with it and that everything was okay." So I looked at the FAA registration, and I looked at him. I said, "Dick, why did you show this to me?" He said, "Well, I just had to have you see this." Well, what I want to show you now is what is on this. You've got to understand that I was there for 22 years and managing this company, and this tower, which receives the signals from the universe, was right there with me. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you, and I cannot make you a copy of this, because this is kind of privileged information that belongs to Comcast Cable Television, so I cannot make a copy of it. But I'm going to ask you to come up here and look at it. And then after you do, we'll turn the TV on. Just bear with me to do this. It'll only take you a minute. I know it's a little late. Would you put the camera on pause, and then right after he pauses the document, would you turn it on? Is it on? Okay. We just paused this so that we could show the people. But interestingly, the document from the Federal Aviation Administration certifies the coordinates of this tower where I was stationed for 22 years for cable television company Comcast to be latitude 4555. That's a bit of a stretch to make it another coincidence. But not only that did I find interesting, but I don't know how many of you looked at this document. And I know this has a logical explanation to it because it's just a, you know, but did you see up here in the corner? Up here, if it doesn't look like a, you know, a flock of galaxies up there, it sure does. So I can't prove anything. But did you see this, AJ? Did you see it? Sean, did you see it? Huh? Oh, okay. You know, it could be a great coincidence. But remember, I was shown this 2 days after we made the connection here of supernova 1987A and 4555. And I would be the first one that if they, where we go, and they would say, you know, did we have to hit you over the head with the tower? I mean, you know, I think it's pretty interesting. And I know you've been here so long that we're going to have to get out of here. But just let me say a couple short things. I feel that I have a direct confirmation in that document, a dramatic confirmation that our search and our conclusion is correct. And I believe with all of my heart, and I know with all of my heart, that those who are coming upon this earth are coming from one place, and that is 4555. Behold, a virgin shall conceive. The Lord will give a sign. And that's a pretty dramatic sign that we've received. That's where the tower is. Well, you know what I thought too interestingly is that how strange if I came from 4555 that I landed at 4555. Because it's not the tower. It's not the tower. It's the latitude is there. It's not the tower. The tower is just a structure that was put on that latitude. The latitude there is 4555. So, you know, the supernova 1987A is the single eye or the pineal gland of the universe, and it is experiencing a kundalini. Now, I'm going to give you something right now, and I promise this, and we're going to wrap this up. I promised I'd give you something to think about. Because what I'm going to try to do is connect you and me to the universe in very curious terms, just like you just looked at that, and you said, gosh, that's a coincidence. Okay. I want you to do something else for me. I want to share something with you. I want you to think of this. It takes you 4 seconds to breathe. I don't know if you're aware of that. You can measure that on your watch. When you inhale and exhale, a normal breath takes 4 seconds. That's what it takes to go. You look at your clock, and it ticks off 4 seconds. Which means, and Jones says that this is anatomically correct, that you breathe 15 times in 1 minute. That's how many times you breathe in a minute, is 15 times. Which means that you breathe 900 times in 1 hour. Okay? Which means if you take 900 times 24 hours in a day, that you breathe 21,600 times a day. All right? Now, each breath is 4 seconds, which means there is 86,400 seconds consumed in that breathing. So it's 86,400 seconds in a day of breathing, 21,600 breaths. All right? I just want you to think about it. I'm not telling you anything. I'm just asking you to think about this. All right? You remember where Dr. Toller, Gary Toller of the Goddard Space Lab said we can only see 10% of the universe? 90% is hidden? Okay? The diameter of the sun is 864,000 miles, of which the number of seconds you breathe is 10%. Okay? The diameter of the moon is 2,160 miles. which is exactly 10% of the number of breaths you take in a day. The distance from the Earth, between the Earth and the Moon, is exactly 216,000 miles. Exactly 10%. Because you breathe 21,600 times a day is exactly 10%. A zodiacal year. Do you know what a zodiacal year is? A zodiacal year is the amount of time that it takes for the sun to be in each sign, like this age of Aquarius. A zodiacal year is exactly 2,160 years. Twelve such years equals 25,920 years. 12 times 2,160, 25,920 years, which is the circumference of the Earth. Somehow, in some way, there is a definite connection between the rhythms and the measurements of the universe and the rhythms and the measurements of human beings down to the length of a breath. That's your breath. That's how many you breathe in a day. That's how many seconds are involved. It is 10% of the diameter of the sun, and the moon is 10% of the number of breaths. And the zodiacal year is exactly, the zodiacal year of 2,160 years is exactly 10% of the number of breaths that you take in a day. It's interesting, too, because, you know, in Greek the word for year is etos, which has a numerical value of 575. And the word for breath is pneuma, which has a numerical value of 576. So, when we consider the eye in the sky as the pineal gland, or the eye in us as there's even more reason to realize that we are definitely part of the being that is the universe, and that the universe is indeed a living being of which we are part. In the same way that your foot is a part of you and lives in harmony with you, so we are the part of the universe and we live in harmony with it. So think about that. Is that coincidence? Yes.
All those numbers equal 9.
All of the Cindy said all of the numbers equal 9. Thank you. That's great. That's great. I'm sure that Mike is working on that too. And this, incidentally, for those who find trouble with a lot of the Hindu teachings, this is the definition of prana. 4 seconds. Breath. They are exactly right. Not only to the amount of breaths that we take, but in comparison of the 10% in comparing the sun and the moon. It's just there. Everything works in a harmony from the largest down to the smallest. Okay? I got through it. Thank you very much.